Okay, again, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome again. My name is Chef Kevin, and I'm excited to be here today to show you this really awesome bread recipe that's both very simple to make. It doesn't take much time, about 3.5 hours from start to finish. But really, what's awesome about this recipe is it's really delicious. And it looks like you've been in the kitchen all day. There's a couple different versions of it that can make it a little bit different, but what we're going to show you is the quick method, and it requires a couple pieces of equipment when we get started here. You're going to need a Dutch oven, which I have. It doesn't really matter what size Dutch oven. You can use a large, small, an oval. We're looking for a kind of a misshapen sourdough bread look to this finished product. You're going to need a spatula. You could use a whip. You definitely are going to need some parchment paper for this recipe. And the rest of the ingredients we'll go through. As you know, we're making bread and we'll need two different types of measuring tools. These type of measuring equipment is for dry goods, and then this is for liquids. And we're going to have both in here, so you're going to need both types of measuring cups. We're going to get started with the water, which is 1.5 cups of warm water, about 100 degrees, 105 degrees is great. And to that, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. And you really do need to use kosher salt. The iodine in table salt can make the bread a little bit bitter. So stick with kosher salt or even sea salt. And we're going to mix that up to dilute and dissolve that salt, water, and then we're going to sprinkle the yeast on top. And it's 1 packet of yeast or 2.25 teaspoons of yeast. For this recipe, it's best to use an instant yeast, and that's what we're using here. It goes by a couple different names. Instant yeast is the most important name, but it comes in a jar sometimes that's labeled bread machine yeast. That's the type of yeast you want to use for this recipe. You can use dry active yeast. It will just take longer to rise. And one of the great things about this recipe is how quickly it does rise. Now we're going to add the flour, and this is 3.25 cups of bread flour. You're also able to use all-purpose. Bread flour adds a little bit more flavor, and it gives it a better rise if you're using bread flour, but all-purpose would work just as well. And I'm going to use a spatula to mix the flour in, because this is a very sticky, kind of messy dough, actually. So I'm going to use just a rubber spatula to mix the water and the flour. And you're going to think this is really too wet, but it won't be in the final product. So after you get it mixed, you don't want to overmix it. You just want to combine the water and the flour so it's all mixed together, and it's that simple. The mixing is done. After you mix it, you want to put it in your typical bread making mode. You want to put it in a warm place, covered with a towel. And once you do that, you can put it by your oven, wherever a nice warm place is, and that will rise for 2.5 hours, give or take a few minutes. And when it's done rising, this is how it will look. And it's pretty simple. You don't have to do anything else to it. After that rise time, you're going to go back to your spatula, and this is the only real technique to this recipe, and it's kind of fun actually, is you're going to roll this bread out onto the parchment paper. And it's still pretty sticky, which is fine. You're just going to kind of ball it up and get it all put into the corner. And you're going to roll it onto the parchment paper. Just like that. Again, it's very sticky. Then you're going to take the parchment paper and you're going to make and fold it over into a loaf. Just like that. Now you can take your spatula and you can help it fold over, of course. And you want to shake some of that extra flour off. And this is where you can do kind of whatever you want in making a loaf. You can make a round loaf if you wanted. You can keep it as an oval, but that's up to you. Once you have your shape and the parchment paper, it's in the center of the parchment paper, which is important. We're going to let that sit for a second. Meanwhile, you want to preheat your oven to 450 degrees while you're doing this. And you want to put your cast iron pot in the oven for about 30 minutes while it's preheating. Once the cast iron skillet is good and hot after about 30 minutes at 450, and this is not preheated, so obviously you want to be very careful. You'll take it back out of the oven and you're going to lower the bread loaf right into this hot cast iron pot, just like that. You're welcome to also, if you wanted to, take a sharp knife and make some design in the top, if you wanted to do that. I did not do that on this loaf that I just baked just a little bit ago. But that looks a little like misshapen, and that's kind of the look you want, actually. And it can be looking like more like a sourdough bread. You put the lid on it, and you put it back in the oven at 450 for 35 minutes. After the 35 minutes, you'll take the lid off for 10 minutes, and it'll brown. And this bread is really quite beautiful. It turns out similar to this. And I used a large cast iron pot for this particular loaf. So I wanted it more round and not so high. This one will bake off. It'll be small and high, if that makes sense. And so when you cut into the loaf, you can hear that it's crunchy. It's a beautiful texture and still warm. And it's just really delicious. The other thing that you can do is once the bread dough is proofed, you can put it in the refrigerator and let it sit. And the instructions are in the recipe for that. If you wanted a little bit more flavor, the longer it's in the refrigerator, the more flavor it will be given. So again, that's as simple as this recipe is. And you can have beautiful looking bread on your table, at our table, in about 3.5 hours. which is pretty cool in my book. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it. And we're open now for questions.